All right. Thank you for joining me. This is Bold Like a Leopard, also known as Razor Sharp Report or Razor Sharp News Chronicle, which is my newsletter. And I wanted to talk to you today about the bedrock issue of our time. The fundamental issue of our time is the First Amendment and preserving it and preserving freedom of speech on the world level, if not only in America. And the reason that I want to bring this up is, of course, that we're seeing unprecedented levels of censorship nowadays. And every week there's just a new major example that we're seeing. And yet we're being told, well, this is all in order to protect Americans from misinformation. Specifically, medical misinformation is the one most commonly cited. But it's been used in the past for climate disinformation. It's been used for things like Holocaust denial that I'll agree are not really what I would say are productive pursuits of time. But I will stand here and say, even as I'm sitting in my car, but I'm standing here and saying that there should be no guardrails on the First Amendment apart from issues that, first of all, threats and libelous claims and things like that, which are already governed in American law. And abroad, I think that you'll see that in many countries, their sharing of our values of freedom of speech are very different, right? In France, for example, it's been illegal for, I believe, over 10 years, might even be longer, to deny the Holocaust. And my opinion is that making something illegal, actually, in some ways, it empowers the person committing the illegal act. It makes their act more significant. And therefore, when we try to limit the freedom of speech of people who put forward ideas that are controversial and maybe offensive to certain constituencies, it does empower them. It disenfranchises them at first, but it makes their speech seem much more potent than it has to be. And this week, so I do want to start off first by saying, if you're following me on one of the conventional platforms, specifically YouTube, I want you to make the switch and go to BitChute or to Odyssey or Rumble, right? I would say that BitChute is the most free speech supporting video posting platform, but all of them are fine. And there is a lot of controversy over the fight right now between Gab and Getter. My personal opinion, regardless of whether I agree with the philosophy of Andrew Torba, is that Gab is a much better website. It's got a much stronger commitment to freedom of speech. But you should use both if you can, because you can reach different audiences with both. Now, to get back to the underlying topic, you had this week the Surgeon General of the U.S., Vivek Murthy, actually call for companies to, try to limit the speech and the spreading of disinformation, is what they would call, of Joe Rogan, who's the biggest podcaster in the world. His podcast is basically listened to, I think, by an average audience of 11 million every day, which is monumental if you think about it. 11 million people talking, just listening to a guy talking about DMT. It's really disgusting, because a lot of these networks that I think have been criticizing Rogan are ones that have shown that their audience is just declining. It's just going lower every single day. You see new indications that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, by the way, their audiences are declining. Fox News is declining simply at a much slower rate and retaining a good audience. I think they do some things in order to actually adapt to the new day, but I'm not a fan of any of the major networks. So I would say the fact that Vivek Murthy is doing this, I think, is appalling. It's disgusting. A person who is at the cabinet level, like him, should really be censured if Congress actually had a pair of cojones to, do so, but they don't. And I don't think even the Republicans would have the stones to do it. But that's where we are. And Dr. Murthy, I think, is doing a huge disservice to his cause because, number one, by saying that, well, we need to limit the spread of disinformation by someone else, well, that's you just saying that your message cannot get out because somebody else has a more appealing one. And while that may be true, you have to ask yourself, why is your message so unappealing? And the answer I would give is that as the face of, or one of the faces of the Biden administration's COVID-19 response, Vivek Murthy has to contend with the fact that many of their predictions are wrong and much of their advice is erroneous. And in fact, I would say a lot of their recommendations, not just him, but other people within it, with the FDA and the CDC, they've led to the deaths of people. And the decision recently to revoke FDA certification for monoclonal antibodies. How many people who have already gotten sick with COVID-19, and regardless of whether they're vaccinated or not vaccinated, how many of those people have to suffer longer or potentially die because the FDA and the CDC and the Surgeon General's office or whoever's making the decision are playing politics with medical treatments, right? And this shouldn't be controversial, but it is, because these organizations, these federal bureaus, are basically trying to tell people how to seek treatment for an illness. And now, beyond just the vaccine mandates, which were a failure, that was a coercive issue that went into a person's right to choose their own medical care and informed consent. Now they're actually violating it in a almost passive way. If a person wants to seek a controversial medical treatment, that's the plot of Dallas Buyers Club. If they want to seek a medical treatment that's not approved by the government and they want to have an avenue to do so, and that medical treatment proves to be popular and effective, and the government gets in the way, they are using a legal mechanism to actually violate a person's right to informed consent in the medical setting, right? I consent to this medical procedure. I know full well that I want to take part in it, and somebody steps in and says, not so fast, I won't allow it. This is the government in action, supposedly there to protect you, and they're not. They're actually helping to harm you. I know a few people. In fact, I know a woman who runs an educational institution here in my area who took monoclonal antibodies, and she was likely going to survive the infection, but it helped her get over it much quicker. And she happened to have an upcoming wedding of one of her children, and thanks to the treatment, she was able to actually go rather than stay home. Well, Vivek Murthy and the federal medical establishment are making it so you can't do that. You can't actually seek the best treatment possible. And that's a violation of their freedom. And what are they doing instead of helping people seek the best treatment that they can get? They're going after people like Joe Rogan for no apparent reason. The reason is because Joe Rogan offers a second opinion by having people like Robert Malone on his show, by having Dr. Robert Malone, by having people, I believe he also had Dr. Peter McCullough on, and by having a number of people who are COVID dissidents at this point. I think he's had Alex Berenson on. And then furthermore, you also have similar issue on YouTube. You have Dan Bongino effectively being banned at first temporarily, now permanently from YouTube. And it's basically something that he actually invited. He was saying, well, yeah, go ahead and ban me. I already have an alternative platform. He's a major investor in Rumble. Rumble has succeeded to some degree. I wouldn't say that it's come to the point where it's actually threatening Google, per se, but it's come a very long way. And what I have been trying to say for a while is that the free speech movement needs to go back to a very fundamental level, which is that we don't need to apologize for defending the free speech of anyone. So long as those people aren't behaving violently, so long, effectively, unless somebody is doing something that goes beyond speech and doing things that are actually harmful to other people, tangibly, I don't have to apologize for what they're saying. I don't have to apologize for their freedom of speech, period. Their freedom of speech is protected under the First Amendment just as much as mine is, just as much as yours is. The fact that Joe Rogan has an immensely popular podcast, which is much larger than mine, to put it lightly. But his podcast is tremendously popular. He has the same First Amendment rights as all of his listeners, as the small minor podcasters, as people who have never podcasted, as people who despise him. He has the same First Amendment rights, and that's going along with a different issue that I brought to light with my recent piece in American Greatness, which is called "Sorry Not Sorry." In that article, I went through the whole saga, which is unfolded. I didn't go in through detail, but I did bring up a number of episodes that happened during the Trump years, where there were a number of conservative commentators who would say, yeah, we defend the freedom of speech of people like Alex Jones. We defend the freedom of speech of people like Nick Fuentes. We defend the freedom of speech of people like, Laura Loomer. But we condemn, and they would often go first and say, we condemn everything that they say, and we don't like them, and we don't like, and they're horrible people. They would often say, but they're entitled to freedom of speech. And my argument was that you do not go and defend freedom of speech that way. When you say, whether before or after your defense, that the person that you're defending is somebody that you find distasteful, it actually distracts from the core issue, which is that your freedom of speech is your freedom to disagree with the person you're defending, and therefore his freedom of speech is essential for yours. That's something that I find to be one of the more interesting issues with why freedom of speech is so important in the United States, why the First Amendment is such a major bedrock of American political thinking. And yet, there are people out there who will say, I think like Cass Sunstein, for example, this well-known attorney, has made arguments in the past that the government should monitor blogs and other alternative media groups, and basically see that they're not spreading disinformation that could compromise the government's capability. Those are things that have already happened years and years ago, in the 90s, maybe even before that. And you're having, even as we speak, a major issue with government disinformation. On the one hand, you have in Ukraine, the U.S. government is trying to claim that a Russian invasion of the country is imminent. You have the Ukrainian government trying to say, well, I think you're kind of inducing panic here. Please lower your tone. This is basically what President Zelensky of Ukraine said today regarding President Biden. And yet, here in the United States, so understand this, the American government is trying to say that we will do everything possible in order to defend the territorial integrity of Ukraine, while at the same time they're denying that there is any reason to fear the deteriorating border integrity of the United States, territorial integrity. And also, you're having the Canadian government, this is what's really surreal, they're trying to deny that there's a major protest against the Prime Minister, Trudeau, on the part of truckers. So you're seeing the effects of disinformation real time, but those are the effects of disinformation on the part of governments. And the government, this is what I want you to understand. Don't just think about it in moral terms. If you're a group of people like the government and you need to maintain control, and the information that is happening in the field actually works to erode your control and hurt your ability to keep people on your side and it actually might anger them against you, of course you would engage in disinformation. Governments have always done that. And that's in part their role. For example, governments in wartime would often tell people things that were, untrue in order to keep morale up and in order to protect the confidentiality of certain military procedures that were going on. Now, those are things that are understandable, but it doesn't mean that you, as the American citizen, or you as the world, the citizen of whatever country, whether it's Denmark or Russia or Mexico, it doesn't mean that you don't have the right as a citizen to question the integrity of the government if you can prove, or if you can demonstrate by the means of any data that you have or some sort of other tangible information that they're lying. And if you're able to prove that they're lying, it should be wrong, at least in the United States, for the government to go to the American people and say, hey, this person you cannot listen to, and we're not going to allow him to broadcast. That's something that I find to be essential to keeping the American idea alive. We have to remain vigilant right now because there's of course the issue of Julian Assange and the fact that he's tried to warn Americans for many years. And again, so the freedom of Julian Assange to report information that is, germane to the problems with the American war effort and various criminal activities that had to do with that, and illegal, illegal wiretapping, things like that. His freedom to do that, it's independent of any issues that you might have with his opinions, right? He has many opinions. I've read some of his opinions, and obviously, just because you get information from Julian Assange, it doesn't mean that you're endorsing his character as a person. It doesn't mean that you're endorsing everything he's said at every moment of his life, or every decision, or every date that he's gone on since high school. You're saying that you've received information from this fella, and you find it to be very important to reconcile it with what's actually being shared by the government. And when the government is shown to be lying, and Julian Assange is shown to be telling the truth, that's an indication that this is a First Amendment issue. And the fact that he's been cooped up in a prison at Belmarsh for the last couple of years, the fact that before that he was cooped up in the Ecuadorian embassy, it shows that this issue isn't a new issue. If anything, it's an issue that's been getting worse for many, many years. Julian Assange's issue of freedom of speech is the exact modern-day equivalent of the Pentagon Papers, which was the famous leak of a number of documents from the Defense Department in the 60s relating to the Vietnam War by Daniel Ellsberg. So I'm going to also go here and say, those of you that are saying, well, we believe in their freedom of speech, but why should we be on these platforms with people who have a lot of these views that we find offensive and that we think don't actually add to the public conversation? So hear me out for a second. I said earlier that I think Gab is a better platform than Getter. That doesn't mean I don't think Getter has an appropriate place for people who might like the type of conversation that's on there. I've used it a little bit. It's not exactly yet at the point where I can use it a lot because I don't know a lot of people on it. But I've been using Gab for a much longer time, partly because it's been around for a longer time. But I'll tell you a different thing. In my article, I said that while there's a lot of people on Gab who have, actually like openly racist and openly anti-Jewish opinions, and I, as a Jewish person, somebody who disagrees with those opinions, it doesn't make me it doesn't give me joy to read what they say. But the fact of the matter is, I can have conversations with people like that. I had a conversation through Gab this week with somebody who, really illuminated me to how their mindset works. Not in a good way, right? This is a person who was basically a Nazi sympathizer. And it became clear after asking him about Hitler's campaigns in various countries. I might actually go into this next week in a real video, like a explanation. But I went into this. I said, look, you have all these campaigns that he did in Europe. How do you explain your position of how he was saving the European peoples with the fact that he brutalized so many of them? And became pretty clear that he was pretty ignorant of how World War II went. So first of all, the one value that you get out of it is you actually get to see how twisted and even ignorant some of these people are of the topic that interests them the most, right? They have such an in-depth commitment and belief in what they think, but they won't actually go and explore the real events and circumstances of what happened around it, right? So that's one issue. The other issue is that on Gab, you can actually form your own groups. You can form your own communities. You can communicate with people. You can meet people with common interests around the world and in your own community. And you can do basically the same things you do on other social media and on Getter and on all these other platforms. I think you also have the same capabilities. But the idea that, you're only going to meet a bunch of racists on there, it's not exactly true. If you want to find them, they're not hard to find. But the more people that join, the more people that are normal, that join a platform, that form their own groups and interests, the more they glom on and basically create their own space within Gab. I think that it will change the character of the platform. I think that inevitably Gab will become not exactly mainstream, but closer to mainstream within their own communication space. And I don't mean mainstream in that you're going to see people who are, going to MIC resistance protests and wearing pussy hats and things like that. But I do think it'll mean people that have, varying other opinions, people who are in there only because they believe in homeschooling, and there are people like that. People who are there just because they want to talk about woodworking or gardening or music or robotics or finance. Those are the groups that need to join, and through that they can actually do much more to improve the conversation than censorship would. Because once you have people presenting all sorts of different interests in the same space, the people that you consider to be offensive and repugnant, you no longer seem to hear them anymore, because they're occupying a much smaller square of a much larger space. The more people join, the more the space expands, and the more the space expands, the more room you have to breathe. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me first and foremost on BitChute, on Odyssey, Rumble. You can find my newsletter below on Substack. You can find my Telegram channel, Razor Sharp Report. You can also find my Gab and Minds and Getter accounts below, and my Subscribe Star if you want to donate. And have a great evening and weekend, and I'll talk to you later.